ain't going back. Not gonna buy into all that. Hey, hey, ain't gonna hide. Gonna let all the fear slide. Got mother nature, it's on my side. Got a whole of the loving growing inside.
All right, hello everyone. Welcome once again to the new now. I'm delighted to have Iam Saums on. And as I sat here meditating, well, over the last few days about my relationship with Iam, I pretty much recall having shared everything, pretty much everything he's written, almost since the first thing he shared. And if we've missed any, I invite Iam to let me know so that we can get those into the public eye as well. Iam, hello, and welcome to our chat today.
Hello, Lorenzo. How are you?
I'm doing great. As we talked just a bit before we got on, my life has been amazing. I've been wondering how I got to where I am. I've been seriously considering some of the challenges I've had, since first breath to, this morning. And so it brings me to our chat today, which I would like to title, and it can go anywhere because I've changed titles before I've made things public. But today, let's talk about social contamination.
Oh,
So,
okay.
social contamination. So what would you or how would you define, let's say, those two words? Because I know you've written about it a bit over the last few years in your way, and I would like to get your take on that.
I believe for the most part, it's the degree of the toxicity that's currently within society. And the toxicity that I'm referring to is behavioral, it's elemental, it is relatedness between people and how people treat each other. And also, like what came to me when we were talking before this conversation, all of the toxicity in the food,
Mm.
in the water, in the things that we drink, even in the air. It's everywhere now. Before, like when we were younger, when we were in our 20s or 30s or whatever, it didn't seem so prevalent, the toxicity in society as it does now.
I would agree. I
Yeah.
would agree. You could have a breath of fresh air. You could go to a forest. I was visiting my childhood neighborhood not too long ago, since my parents are in the same house that they've been in since I was in kindergarten. So I was reacquainting myself with the neighborhood that I used to, play in and grab my bike. And all day you wanted to run outside. Your idea wasn't to sit inside. It was as soon as you opened your eyes, you grabbed your bike or your feet, and you ran into the neighborhood. And there used to be little forests around, and gullies and trees and tree houses and all those sorts of things that attracted me, pretty much from the time I woke up to the time my mother screamed at me to come home for dinner, or wanted to scream at
Hmm.
me to come home for dinner. And that seems to be missing, at the very least, for the ability to develop an imagination, beyond what's shared socially, which I would say is another form of contamination. The media, the cell phones, etc.
Sure. And I believe that if you look at it from a standpoint, or when we look at it from a standpoint of the dynamics of a human being, from the soul level to the intuitive level to the energy centers of the being to the energy that moves through the universe into the energy centers of the being, from the emotional aspect of the heart and the expression of the heart and the Taurus energy that's around the heart, as well as the mind and the body. It seems to me that, like, if we're experiencing the universe from a soul level, which is very difficult to do, especially now because social reality is so intense, it's so clouded, it's so obscured, it's so distractive, and it creates a lot of preoccupations for us away from the soul. But it seems as though that the universality or the energy that comes from the universe into our being comes obviously from the universe and our soul. The toxicity or the social contamination that you're talking about, it's something that impacts our body, then it impacts our minds, then it disrupts our hearts, then it distorts our intuitive ability and our balance and our equilibrium between the centers of our being, to the point where we're just totally cut off from the soul level. But I mean, that's characteristic of humanity, not all of humanity, but primarily humanity being distracted out of themselves and away from their soul into society. And it's that social contamination, in my belief, that creates that division or that schism that occurs. I'm writing an article, right, a new one right now, like I was mentioning before we started this chat, called Heir of Transcendence. Heir as an HEIR, inheritance of transcendence or universality. And in it, one of the things I point out is how when we're born into this world, you know, from the soul level into the physical level. And there's like, in my belief, there's phases that we go through, as we come towards the earth in the soul form, we come through all of the planetary elemental properties, as we move towards the earth. And once we are phased through our soul, phasing through our intuition, through our energy centers, through our heart, through our mind, through our body, and then we become a human being in that birth, that experience in some respects, much like physical birth is a traumatic energetic experience. It's very intense, right? So there's already a schism that occurs during birth when we're born into this world in a physical sense. Beyond that, because we're kids and we're children, infants, into early adolescence, and all of the programming and conditioning that can occur in society, especially now, like what we were talking about before with the younger gentleman that you were discussing and what he was bringing up, is because social reality is so intense and it's so convoluted and it's so misinterpreted, and in essence it's an illusion. Because of all of those things, it's easy for people with the lack of consciousness or awareness, or at least a containment of that, to be influenced or impacted by the social contamination that goes on around us. So it's a natural course of events that occurs within our oblivion as we are assimilated into reality.
Natural course of oblivion. It's an interesting way
Oh,
to put it.
that's essentially what it is. Like, because as children, we're trying to figure out, as infants and children, we're trying to figure out or belong or assimilate into this program, which is life, or reality, or our hereditary background, or our lineage in our bloodlines, or all the institutional programming that occurs when it comes from education, religion, medium, all these things, especially now with social media and all the different avenues of social media and how that impacts and influences people in such a chaotic way, in a very dysfunctional way, and it's very instant gratification. So the social contamination occurs when we're still oblivious to the impacts and influences, and some people never are conscious of the social contamination that goes on around them. And they don't realize that eventually over time, because of that oblivion that everybody has, and even I mean, I selectively choose to be oblivious to certain things, like music I don't like or television shows I don't like. I mean, that's like a choice, so to speak. But there's always a measure of oblivion as a human being that we experience, because we're not taught consciousness. We're not taught energy. We're not taught about the universality that we all carry. We're not taught about the soul. We're taught about all this other stuff to divert us from all those things. So the social contamination ultimately starts to seep into the roots of our being. And it comes externally into the internal until it just cuts us off.
It's an interesting way to see it. I mean, obviously, if you put, something like a piece of, let's say beautiful, freshly baked bread into a glass of, dirty water, eventually the bread's going to get dirty, and it seems to me that, is what you're, mentioning, how we become who we become, through the filters or the contamination of the social, as you said, the reality. What I find interesting in the midst of all this is like, why and how do people like us, because my parents never helped me with that. It was never something that was, grow up and become spiritual. My friends at the time never helped me with that either. If anything, it was the opposite, schooling, as you say, media. And yet, here we are having chosen, and I do feel, it's my belief, as you say, that we choose to come here and we choose our parents and we choose the time even when we're born for various reasons, because we have a feeling that at the kernel, at the core, at our center, we'll be able to overcome the contamination one way or the other, no matter how long it takes us, no matter how dirty, bloody, or painful it can be. What I'm really getting at is, what do you feel is the way to move away from the social contamination for people listening to this chat, for people listening to this conversation? They're going, sure, I hear you. I've fallen through, those dirty traps myself. How do I move up and away and out of that?
It's similar to the detoxification of the body. Like when you change your diet, or when you are removing certain things from your consumption, like tobacco or alcohol or drugs or any of those things. It's a detoxification of the being
Mm,
on that level. And it's a multi-dimensional experience, because it's a multi-dimensional being. You know, people are impacted by social contamination, I believe, because they just don't have an awareness of how much they're impacted or influenced on all those different levels. So personally, what I do is every morning I wake up, the first things I do for an hour and a half every morning, and I wake up early to do this because I would never be able to do it if I didn't. But I pray, in the tradition that we've talked about before, and I meditate for 20 minutes, and then I practice yoga. And so it's the prayer is like the spiritual thing, connecting with the soul, and also with my relations in my community, in our communities. But then the meditation is more of a mental thing, like where it's actually setting the mind into a space of where it's more of a tool than it is the driving force of my being. And then the yoga is actually an expression of setting up and aligning my body with those intentions. And so before I do anything in my day, those are the things that I do. And then from there, during the course of the day, I'll write, which is an expression of creativity, which requires a lot of the times when I write, there has to be an alignment. There has to be like, I have to physically be calm, and I have to physically be relaxed. I have to mentally be clear,
mm,
to receive, because when I write, none of the stuff I write, it's not me. It never was me, never will be me. And I'm glad for that, because in comparison to what I've been given over the years of my writing experience, I don't know shit, and I don't want to know shit. I'd rather understand, and the understanding comes from listening, you
mm,
know? Like, so if I'm sitting there spouting shit out to people, in blogs or articles or whatever you want to call them, and I'm not understanding at the root core of it when I'm actually writing it, or if I'm not receiving it, or I'm not getting guidance from that alignment that I create every morning, then it's just another thing out there.
mm,
It's not something that, and it's not even signature harmonic to me. And what I mean is that it's like whatever is coming is not something that is of me. It's of something that's beyond me, or the me that I believe is me, whatever that is. Who knows? I'm still learning. That's the thing. Like, most people think that they're this, and that's what they are until the day they die, and that's
mm,
just not the reality of it all. So, for me, it's a detoxification every day, because we're exposed to that social contamination on a daily basis on so many different levels that we're not even aware of, which is where the oblivion comes into it. And then when you add to that, and this is like an insight that came to me in writing over the last couple of articles, where if you look at social reality or society as an illusion, which it is, then in order for us to interact or connect or relate with this illusion, we have to create our own personal delusion. And we have to live in that personal delusion, which ultimately manifests as this bubble of reality. And within this bubble of reality, we reside, and we defend ourselves, or we hide, or we um, escape, or whatever, however we want to utilize that bubble as a defensive measure against the social contamination or chaos or dysfunctionality of the world. And then within that, we really don't leave the boundary. Maybe it's fear, anxiety, insecurity, whatever. We don't leave that bubble. And so it's really apparent to me now that unless you leave that bubble of the personal delusion, which is connected with the illusion, which we interpret as society and reality, you'll never experience the universe. You'll never relate with your soul. It's impossible. So
Yeah,
that's the,
I think you mentioned a couple of good points there. But,
yeah.
leaving the bubble, detox. And,
Mm-hmm.
I've studied quite a bit, meditated on quite a bit, is like why it's so hard for some people to move, or why when you share something obvious about becoming happier, let's say, or healthier, or what I would say, I could be wrong, for someone else is a healthier, happier existence. Most people, as you've said, will get angry with you, or argumentative, or dismiss you outright, or never see you again. Or, I've noticed the more I wake up, the less friends I have, so to speak. And I don't even like to use the term waking up. Let's say the more I become in tune with who I am, according to who I want to be, the less friends I have. On the other hand, recently, over the last little while, I'm developing more friends. Like you and I have become friends, and other people as well, that I don't necessarily see people face to face, but I guess my location has nothing to do with the interactions I'm having, and maybe being non-linear and non-local is pretty much what the stream is all about, is you're everywhere and nowhere at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps, as you said, the detox is a fear of death, I would say. It's why most people won't move, like a fear of death of their jobs, or their comfort, or their homes, or their relationships, or their body. And once you realize, as seems to me you have as well, that there is no death really, right? We're all energy, and we just transform at the base of things. I am is here now, and he's gone. Maybe from birth to death, you get to pretend to be I am, to play at being I am, or I get to pretend to play at being Lorenzo. And that's a beautiful gift that we get. We get to play in this field of energy, as a being, and then take that experience back to wherever the gift came from originally. And if you play with it with a great consciousness, maybe you get shinier, and you get a nicer return for your investment of being here, simply because you're being honest with yourself about who you are, where you are, and how you'd like to grow up. And the detox is definitely part of that process that most people are, because it's painful, right? It's painful to detox, right? It's painful to realize you've been wrong. If anybody that's listening has done a physical detox, and I've done that, you go on a fast, it's hard. If you've put shit in your body, as an example, like you ate lots of McDonald's when I did growing up, it gets stored in your fat cells, so to speak, and it doesn't necessarily leave, or stored in your intestines, and doesn't necessarily leave. And then when you start fasting and you give your body a chance to get rid of it, you have to feel it again. You might have stinky breath, you might stink, you might get headaches if you put poisons in your body. I've experienced all of those. So perhaps the spiritual detox is just like that. If you've put bad ideas inside, bad beliefs, bad conclusions, and you have to get them out. Of course, you have to feel them again. Of course, it hurts. Of course, it's painful, and it's par for the course, I would say.
Yeah. So the social contamination, like what you were talking about before we started this conversation, if you look at it from a standpoint of the detox, there's the physical detox, which is being observant and aware of what it is that you're putting in your body, and also the physical components and elements within society, like air, or quality of water, or the quality of food, or the quality of lifestyle that we have on a physical level. People that don't exercise, well, they're going to have a certain experience, and the people that do, they will have a different experience, right? So then with the mind beyond the body, it's more of a disconnecting from the societal matrix, you know, observing the dependencies that we have with medium, with our amusement, with our entertainment, and all these things that are distractions. They are escape mechanisms, no matter, I mean, like I'm a huge horror and sci-fi film fan. I mean, I love it. That's like I can't get into drama. I can't get into romance. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with those things, but I just can't do it. But for me, there's something ever since, like when I was a kid, and my brother and I conned our babysitter when we were like 9 and 7 to watching The Shining because it was being shown on TV. You know, ever since then, I've been, really drawn into that. But over time, I've realized that watching things like that, specifically horror, it helped me to face my fears. So it's more of a transformational experience beyond the entertainment value. But getting back to like the mind, like being silent, that's why I do the meditation, is to actually unplug myself from the societal matrix in which I exist, as a human being. And then there's the emotional elements of it where you become observant of all of the reactivity that you have on an emotional level. Somebody cuts you off on the road, you get pissed off. Somebody says something that you interpret as being bad, you get pissed off, whatever. You get irritated, aggravated. And then specifically for me, like I noticed that, and I'm sure that you noticed this as well with your wife, but with my wife, like I learned so much about emotionality in a relationship because you can't escape it, especially if you live with your significant other. The emotionality, and it can become complicated because it's very multidimensional, like when it's fulfilled, right? When it's not like just this convenience or this, what is the word? Yeah, well, it's convenience. It's like, I think a lot of people that are in relationships may slide in and out of the convenience factor, or the element of the convenience of, well, I'm with this person, I might not be extraordinarily happy and I might not be empowered and I might not be fulfilled, but I'm just going to stick in this relationship because it's just convenient. I have financial stability or whatever it is. But once you get to the balancing of the multidimensionality of the heart or the emotions involved in regards to the social contamination and what it is that we can do to bring that equilibrium and balance to our being, then you really start tapping into the intuition, and then insights, epiphanies, clarity, understanding starts to come within that foundation of that equilibrium and balance within the heart center. When you have the body where it needs to be, or you have the mind where it needs to be, and then that intuition opens up that gateway to the soul and to the universe, and then it just can flood. Like over the last maybe 2 months, I've been writing like crazy, like throwing out an article every 2 weeks, and it's like, and even like for music, I've been writing new music and I've been playing music, and the experience of the creative expression of music or writing for me has been fluent in such a way where there's a grace to it. There's like this flow to it that's just beautiful, and it kind of like surprises me sometimes too. I like sit back and go, whoa, this is really nice, but it's a multi-dimensional practice of detoxification on all these different levels, because like we were saying earlier, the social contamination impacts and influences us on the physical, then the mental, then the emotional, then beyond, and then it just cuts us off from the soul and the universe and our intuition.
May even start at the emotional level. I've heard, when you're in your mama's belly, if she's stressed or upset
Okay.
or worried about money or unhealthy, the various reasons, obviously it gets passed along to the little one. But I think that comes back to no victims even before you're born. When I say, well, you chose that vessel, you were smart enough to decide that you wanted those challenges so that you could face them and get over them. And I think that's where the strength comes to do everything you've mentioned. Maybe
Oh,
maybe that's why some people can do it. And so, like I used to envy when I was younger, people with lots of money or people that were taller than me, more handsome than me. I went to a rich high school and my parents didn't have a lot of money. I taught, 16-year-olds, because you could drive when you were 16 back in the day with sports cars going to high school. And I was going like, why not me? What's going on? I can't believe it. Why doesn't my father have a lot of money and give it to me? Buy me the sports car. Why aren't I dating all the cheerleaders or what have you? And that little voice even back then would say, one day you'll understand. I still remember hearing it's going like, one day you'll figure out why this is all happening or not happening to you, and you'll be happy. I still remember being 12 or 13 and hearing that voice. And finally, I think because probably we're living our entire life at once, because time could be another topic for conversation, is all now, anyways. I think it would echo to my future self, or my future self would echo back to my younger self and go, don't worry about it. You'll figure it out one day and you'll be super happy you didn't get the sports car and the cheerleaders and you have 4 kids and, an ulcer and $1 million when you're 44. And now I can, now I can look back and go, oh my goodness, how lucky have I been?
Sure. I think another good practice, and there's, whatever practice it is that helps you to get in alignment or within equilibrium within, to be able to connect with the universe and the soul. There's a lot of different practices. I mean, I have these practices, but there's other people that have a lot of other practices that they fulfill on. The thing that I've noticed mostly is if we can observe the level of our oblivion, our personal oblivion, that, like, the things that we don't know,
Mm,
and how they impact and influence us. I mean, just observing and bringing consciousness to our oblivion would create an amazing transcendental shift in alignment with the universal energetic shift that's going on in this new era.
mm, I would agree.
Mhm.
I mean, maybe the fact is, people even consider it from a reasonable perspective, and I don't think humans are reasonable. If you don't know what you don't know, and that's obvious, if you consider your life, there's obviously things you don't know, because everyone's like that. You would have to be the hugest, biggest narcissist in the world to think you know everything already. And
Oh,
so,
sure.
quite literally, you can't think about what you don't know because you don't know it.
Yeah.
So you have to access other parts of yourself. You can call it your soul, you can call it your guts, your intuition, your destiny, whatever. You have to allow, as you've said, meditative quiet time. I write poetry and I take long walks every day. This is how I do things in garden. Those are my meditations. And always, as you say, things will come that you didn't know you didn't know. You're going, where'd that come from? Something will go like, did you know this? And I go, no, I didn't know that. But well, who's sharing that? I don't know. It doesn't really matter. It's just finally getting it. It's finally getting into my system, and it's a wonderful thing. As you said, like you really fill up with wonder. You get, not wonderful. You get full of wonder instead of full of the contamination of sociality. And I would say for anybody listening and wanting to go through this and feeling the pain, the existential angst, the detox, a lot of the things that we've chatted about, it's worth it. It's worth to go through the pain and the suffering and the angst to break up the relationship, to leave the job, to change your location, to exercise more, even though maybe, you'll be in a lot of pain for the first few months because you haven't done it for 20 years, quite simply for the fact that you'll die one day, as we all will. And it's probably better to face that in a position of power, I would say, than a position of, cowering under your blankets and wondering what's next.
Hmm. Yeah, and some of the social conditioning is external, but some of it's also internal. If you look at it from a standpoint of, or observe it from a standpoint of the filters, perceptions, interpretations, the ideologies, and the fixed um, viewpoints that we adopt over time, whether it's handed down by our parents or our grandparents, or somebody that made an impact in our life or whatever, and maybe it doesn't resonate with us, or maybe it doesn't resonate with us in the present moment anymore. But it seems to me that a lot of the times all of these filters, perceptions, interpretations, biases, even prejudices, all of these things are internal social contamination, hurt feelings, emotional history, things,
Mm,
the emotional baggage, the things that we carry. That's social contamination too, in a sense, because it's something that happened in our social experience
mm,
that made an impact and influence upon us internally that we haven't processed through, or that we haven't resolved. So there could be social contamination that occurs within,
mm,
and when it triggers us, there's a harmonic resonance, or inharmonic resonance,
mm,
between what's happening within us and what's going on outside of us. And sometimes the external will trigger it within, and sometimes the internal triggers it without. And sometimes it may happen at the same time,
mm,
like where there's something that occurs or happens in our daily lives where were triggered both within and without.
Mm.
Those are usually the most intense experiences in my experience, where it really is an opportunity to sit down and be with it and say, okay, what's happening here? And really like have the strength of will to be able to address it in the moment without it becoming even more and more and more of like a snowball. Like if you
Mm.
imagine yourself running up a hill and there's a snowball that's rolling down the hill, and as it starts from the top of the hill, it's smaller.
Mm.
But by the time it hits you, if you're standing there, it's massive. Well, if you run up the hill and you run after it, then you can jump over it
Hmm.
before it becomes too massive. But most people don't do that.
It's a good way to put it. And if you wait till the end of your life, you don't
Yeah,
have the strength to jump over that massive snowball at that point because you wasted your juice in whatever it is you've spent your, 70, 80, 90 years doing. So it's true.
sure.
If you head up that, I mean, it's very, very, very fascinating too. Historical contamination is something that's come to me a lot. Like
Absolutely.
our history. I mean, I asked my father just recently because I've decided he's getting old and I wanted to have some conversations with him before he passed that I, for whatever reason, I haven't. And he never even knew his grandparents, right? His parents never mentioned his grandparents. He doesn't even know about his grandparents. So I
Wow.
also wonder how far back this society and this history goes. It seems even over the last, like living in another part of the world here, we don't get the same news that they get in North America, right? And
Mhm.
and North Americans don't get the same news here, and this other country doesn't get this. So it's interesting, even just from country to country, what you get shared in a social contaminated sense is different. So your dream is different, So imagine like when I travel from North America to Asia and Asia to North America, the people, the way they see things, the news, the food, the monetary systems, what things cost, vastly different, right? And
Mhm.
that's even in the now, in this world from one physical location to the other. So imagine you go back 100 years, who knows what's really true, right? Who knows, how your parents got the information they shared with you, and even who knows where they came from. There's all kinds of interesting theories going around, about orphan trains and where history starts and resets and all these things that, if you want to take it very, very deep, all you really have, as you've said, is yourself and your guts and your intuition to figure this out because, taking anything is rote, no matter who told it to you or where it came from. I think you're in for a lot of hurt unless you corroborate your own truth as you're moving along this path.
And it's a good point that you make with the bloodline, like a hereditary contamination, whether it's behavioral or ideological, or whether it's a mental thing, or whether it's even emotional thing.
Mm.
Like your grandpa was this way and your dad was this way, therefore you're going to be this way.
Mm.
You see it all the time that
All the
it's like a transference that occurs from generation to generation. The interesting thing about it to me is that when you look at social contamination from a standpoint of everything in our society institutionalized, for instance, education, religion, um, most media, if not all media, especially mainstream media, even alternative media has gotten to this point as well, too, to some degree. When you make the distinctions and you have the time to distinguish between um, things that resonate and things that don't.
Mm.
Things that are just trying to catch people's attention and get clicks and likes and comments and blah 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 or whatever. The interesting thing to me is that there is a contamination so intense in society right now because everything is propagandized.
everything.
Politics propagandized, religion is propagandized. I mean, in an essence, you can even say or make a case that everything is a cult.
For sure, I would agree. I think everything is a cult.
Education is a cult. I mean, you're being brainwashed, to fit into this decompartmentalized or compartmentalized society to do this basic function for this person that you'll never meet or you
Mm.
may not even know exists
Mm.
because your attention is elsewhere.
Mm.
And like for religion, I mean, I don't mean to offend anybody, but you know, the Bible was written by men, a bunch of men, you know, in in there's a truth to that, so in essence that's rhetorical based on the interpretations of men at the time, which incidentally were attempting to segue themselves between the people and God, or whatever God is to you.
And it wasn't even in English. And if people study languages and the definition of words, how they've changed over the years, and then people that interpret them, I mean, it's so far from what could have been the original intent of what was written down. If it was, it's amazing, that people can put their life on the line for something that's been so degraded as far as, as you said, I don't want to offend anyone, but even as far as, me studying English and then studying Japanese and how they see language. And so many times I'll say, well, this is so straightforward in English. How do you say this in Japanese? My wife will go, well, you really don't. Or it depends the situation, right? I go, well, you say it this way here.
I wonder how many things in English people say that other people in different cultures don't, because it's probably best they don't.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. And it's like, so, like, how do you say I understand that? And then in Japanese, my wife go, it depends the situation. This is,
Mm.
and I go in English, you just say I understand it, or this is big, and then it fits like big dream, big sandwich, big life, big money, and you go, no, 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 no. So that's just even a small way of seeing, as you've said, it's like if you're not getting your own personal experience and you're believing something, you're literally contaminated with someone else's interpretation
Oh, sure.
of your relationship to spirit or God or whatever you want to call source.
Yeah, I think a lot of the social contamination that we're talking about and that exists in the world and that occurs in the world can be boiled down to the institutionalization of the human race,
Mm,
and how and the agenda and the strategies to fulfill that agenda behind that program, that conditioning of a culture or a race or a species of human beings in such a way where it captivates them within that bubble. You know, they they live in a society. We all live in a society. I'll rephrase that. We all live in a society that's not just toxic, but it's violent.
mm,
It's unsafe. And I mean, to the point where, like, I can recall when the whole COVID thing was going on, and I didn't feel, and I think we've talked about this before, but I didn't feel safe expressing my viewpoints about it because there wasn't a listening for it. And when you did express your viewpoints about it, then you were chastised or you were judged or you were shamed or whatever. So looking at it from a standpoint of the multidimensionality, the social contamination that exists in our society and our experience of life and living in reality, we're getting that on all sides. We're getting that shame. We're getting that trauma. We're getting that judgment. All
mm.
of those things are besieging us. And so most people may choose to go along with the party line of the propaganda
Mm.
because it's easier or more convenient to be able to endure or survive in our toxic society.
I scare people here just by being happy. It happened the other day. Yeah. Like
Good.
literally, because nobody smiles anymore in this part of the world. Almost nobody. Everyone's got that glossy-eyed look when they're walking down the streets. 99.9% of them. Literally yesterday, just by, singing a little and bouncing down the stairs, my wife told me I scared this lady. I saw her jump away from me, looking shocked, and all I was doing was, being happy because,
Mm.
they're seeing something that's a glitch. Gary Z. McZ wrote a good article a long time ago, be the glitch you wish to see in the
Oh, yeah.
Matrix, and just by being a glitch, you freak people out from their, maybe they're contaminated. Maybe it's the opposite of contaminant. What would be the opposite of contamination, do you think? Maybe it can be a good contamination. I think freedom could also be a virus that gets shared, because that is also
That's
contagious.
that's a great point to make, because I believe in society with the contamination like we're talking about, or the toxicity, it is a virus. It's a multi-dimensional virus that shifts people or deepens their connection with their bubble of reality. It's almost like, I don't know if you ever got into Pink Floyd.
Oh yeah, I went to a
uh,
concert in Toronto a long time ago when they
oh,
came
good
through.
one.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of like the whole uh the whole theory and the actuality or eventuality of how the wall came to be.
Hmm.
And I've been recently listening to a lot of Pink Floyd, specifically the Animals album, because it was brilliant. I mean, it's my favorite album that they did. I mean, it just resonates so deeply. Maybe it's the lyrics, maybe it's the progression of the music and so on and so forth. But hearing the stories of the culmination of the album The Wall, and the symbolism of that. I mean, this is like in 79, 78, 79 when Waters was writing this. Roger Waters, the author of The Wall. But in essence, I believe that the whole purpose of putting that album out was to show the world how much we all put a wall up between ourselves and society, or ourselves in reality, or ourselves in our experience, our fulfilled experience. It's just a very powerful thing to observe in how often we're building our wall instead of taking it down.
For sure. Yeah.
And that's where the bubble comes into play. The bubble of reality that people kind of hide out in and wait for the inevitable departure from the world.
Yeah. People forget maybe that bubble's a mirrored bubble, which makes it even more confusing for people if you get lost in yourself.
That would be great though if it was a mirrored ball, like a bubble, because then they would see themselves from all these different angles, and that may empower and encourage them to be able to break out of it.
That's an interesting way to put it because in my estimation, it is a mirrored bubble, and most people use it against themselves by getting lost in their ego, their echo chamber, their mind. But
Sure.
It's true that, I've also used it the way you've mentioned that, if you hear the echo bouncing around, you can, with some intelligence, break out of the mirrored reflection, the self-reflection by understanding that, the answer doesn't come. You can sit and consider a problem forever sometimes, and you get 6 reasons it's good, 6 reasons it's bad, 6 reasons you should, 6 reasons you shouldn't. And you never get beyond the consideration stage on your couch until you make an action, and then you see. And it's from the action that you decide, oh, it worked or it didn't work, or it was good or it wasn't good. And you never know. Obviously, when you don't know what you don't know and you got to go somewhere new, you never know what your choice is going to bring to you, other than you have an intuition or imagination or a gut reaction to something you need to do that you haven't done yet. So it's an interesting way. That's why I like chatting with you. Is you seem to take a lot of times the opposite but equally important perspective on the same thing, which allows me to scratch my head a little and go, wait a minute, I never thought that mirrored bubble could be a good thing. I always thought it's a pain in the ass and a bad thing because it keeps you stuck. But obviously, it can do the opposite if you look at it from the right perspective.
Yeah, maybe eventually being in that mirrored bubble, or that, behind that wall, eventually will empower us or inspire us enough to break it down, or at least observe that it's there. Because the other practice that I would recommend, for prior to, or previous, your previous inquiry in regards to practices that people could do to be able to observe, these things, is to observe their judgments, their perceptions, their filters, their interpretations, all of these things that pigeonhole us into a fixed way of perception, or a fixed way of being, ultimately. I think that's a part of the social contamination internally, is that we draw personal boundaries within our own interpretations and perceptions. Therefore, we don't listen to other people. Like what you said when we were talking before this conversation, most people don't want to be told what to do. They don't even want to hear something from another person that may be a benefit to them because it's coming from another person instead of themselves, even though they're not listening. So how's that going to work? If and maybe that's where it comes, the oblivion, and then you get lost in the ego, and then you start, creating all these fantasies and those romanticism of experience of life that isn't real, but we create it to endure and survive the circumstances that we are in within this social reality.
Yeah, my wife brought up a good point at that. She goes, you're being told your whole life what to do. So most people have an automatic knee-jerk horrible reaction to being told what to do because they're tired of it.
Oh,
Which
yeah.
is interesting because they've been told what to do their whole life from little, and it's usually bad advice, if you like, to be domesticated, indoctrinated, pigeonholed, religion, school, media, etc. From the time you get old enough that you're getting good advice, let's say from a friend, you just, it's the advice you just can't take, as Elena Morissette said, even though it's good advice, coming, and even it's helpful, my reaction used to be the same. Don't tell me what to do, even if it was the best advice possible.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, like a lot of the times when people receive advice from other people, having an awareness of whether or not it resonates for them personally. Like if they have an awareness that something that somebody is suggesting makes sense and resonates for them on a soul level or an intuitive level or an emotional level, whatever, then it's likely going to work until it doesn't for them. But a lot of the times, I think people defend themselves against the advice that may resonate with them because they don't have an experience or they don't have a practice to help them to be able to see the clarity and understanding that can come from that.
I think it causes them pain, so they get a knee-jerk reaction, right? Because if they haven't
Oh,
healed, if they got a wound and you point at it, they're going to blame you for the pain, right? Instead of
sure.
going like, why does that hurt? Like, what's going on? If you realize you're creating everything, I would say we do, and every bit of feeling you have is yours, and I would say it is, then when you're feeling pain, if you want to, you can look at yourself instead of the other person, and maybe that would help people get beyond, this social contaminated bubble dream mirror reality that
Mhm.
a lot of people seem to get stuck in, myself included, when I'm
Part of
not
that
careful.
part of the result of that social contamination is probably a lack of trust that people have with themselves.
Definitely.
And then ultimately that bleeds over into their relationships with other people
Mm,
where they start to project or transfer that lack of trust upon other people.
mm.
And it just spreads like a virus, like we were talking about earlier within society, where nobody really trusts anybody. Nobody's listening to anybody. It's almost like a pinball machine where all these pinballs are bouncing off of each other, and that's society as a
And then,
whole.
and then they trust the wrong thing, like the official explanation, the government
Oh, yeah, like
explanation,
all the authoritarian
the
entities and
theory,
those.
and oh, I trust that, and you're going like, why would
Yeah,
trusting a disembodied voice of someone you've never met seems safer, strangely, or it's been inculcated since young as the right idea than your best buddy, that's saying, your butt is dirty, maybe you should, wipe yourself.
sure. But part of the social contamination within the last few years and how it manifested in such a traumatic and impactful way was the scientific community in relation to the
For
pandemic.
sure. Well,
I mean, there was so much social contamination and toxicity going on from a perceptual perspective. Like I always believed that, people died and it was a tragedy and so on and so forth. They got sick, whatever, they didn't feel well. Whatever level of experience that they had with it all, the worst part of it was the psychological impact or the emotional impact. It wasn't even the physical, because the social contamination and toxicity of the scientific propaganda that was put out about it, that was very narrow
it's
perspective.
one way of
You know,
putting it.
it was, and I mean, I think that was one of the things that I drew as a clarity and understanding for myself in relation to social contamination and toxicity is how the scientific community tried to omit an alternative perspective about what was going on at the time.
They still do.
Yeah. And they will till infinity because like they have to maintain the narrative and they have to maintain the control. I mean, in some respects, it was all an environment of control mechanism in relation to a scientific experiment. And it
Or,
was done on the human race as a scientific experiment.
or perhaps, from a higher level, it is true, but it's just an energetic virus, a contamination pushed on us as physical, because that's how we are, being three-dimensional beings for the most part. And I would say that's maybe how the powers that be have been able to pull it off. There is a virus, but it's just not the kind you think. As we mentioned,
Sure.
freedom can be a virus, or the corona, the crown, the messed up, way you're attached to the world and you're attached to everything else. So obviously, is killing people, but maybe that's ending themselves. A bit of a trick into suicide. That would be my guess.
Well, and it's interesting that you mentioned the whole crown aspect of that and how that is in relationship to the perception that the virus itself and they created for the virus was a way, from a big picture standpoint, was a way to sever the intuitive connection that people have with their soul in the universe. And it's interesting that the corona or the crown symbology was associated with this, because essentially, from the understandings that we have been shown in different avenues, so to speak, mostly alternative, is that it was a severing of the crown or the human being from the intuition and the soul.
Could very well be.
During this time when there was a massive energetic universal shift, which we're still in since 2012, we're still in that energetic shift. But it gets back to what we were talking about with social contamination in relation to practices that people can implement. Is a lot of the times when people are provided with alternative or even quote unquote transcendent information or understanding about certain things like this within society, like what you were saying before, you can't tell me what to do. A lot of people may adopt the interpretation of, well, I already have like this filter in place, so whatever you're telling me doesn't follow the narrative, and therefore I'm going to cut it off. I'm not even going to listen. So I mean, a lot of the things that you and I talk about, Lorenzo, whether it's when we're recording and when we're not recording, I don't talk with a lot of people about, because there's just no listening for that. And so it's good that it gets out there so that people can look at it from a different perspective or consider it even. You don't have to believe it, but if there's a consideration and there's just an elementary or a fundamental observation of these things, of these perceptions, filters, interpretations, deceptions, whatever, being observant of the personal delusion in which we live within the reality bubble and how that's influenced or how that interacts with the illusion of social reality, those things, like on a base level, will really, I believe, shift experience for people in an extraordinary way.
Beautiful way to put it. Maybe we've come to a natural conclusion in this topic on how people can help themselves. I mean, there's so many segues I could take right now, and I'm biting my tongue to not take us into something that will probably be a chat for a different time. But I hear you on the illusions and on the ways people can help themselves, on the social contamination of things. If you understand that history could be altered and your schooling was what it was, and your religion could be altered, if you want to be just, it's in a slight way reasonably intelligent, to understand you don't understand everything. I mean, even from that perspective, you can heal yourself from a bit of the social contamination by, opening your eyes and opening your feelings to moving above and beyond. I mean, I've had the opportunity to use psychedelics. You reminded me when I went to the Pink Floyd concert, the state that I was in at the time. And it was beautiful and it was useful, and I didn't understand it. And I thought I was just having fun. But as I take it back many years later, I get to see why I had decided at that time, a long time ago, from my perspective now, to have that experience, to bring it back towards, even it becomes more relevant now, many decades later, that we're chatting about it. So you never know why you're having the experience you're having, now for the later, for the time being, since it's probably all happening at the same time.
Sure. And I agree that when it comes to hallucinogenics, mushrooms or LSD or anything like that, that was like one of the first times on many different levels I experienced a transcendental shift.
Me too.
And ever since then, and I'll never regret ever doing that in my life. Of course, I was much younger, but I'll never regret that, because it opened up my awareness to something beyond myself and the reality in which we live that I will never give up in my life.
No, I was so obtuse. I needed that. That's just me. I was really, really, really contaminated to a level where I was a super obtuse young man. And, so I needed the punch in the head that they gave me, let's say, or the punch in the guts or the punch in my intuition to kind of go, wait a minute, what's that? something different than
It's
I
like
thought was possible.
the universe kicks in the ass and you know, you end up like 50,000 miles down the road.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
But no, I mean, yeah, I think like but the thing is, to me, the biggest thing that's going on right now for people is the universal energetic shift. And everything that has been transpiring since around 2012, winter solstice time, up to this time, these are opportunities, open opportunities
Yeah.
to be able to go with the flow on an energetic level with this energetic shift, this universal energetic shift.
It's beautiful. Like you say, you can use the social contamination to become the antidote. You know, they've said since
Okay.
2020 or before, it's time for a reset. So people have been fighting that. You'll go, great. I'm just not going to let you choose what my reset is, right? I'll make that choice for myself, how I want to reset my
Fortunately,
life. Yeah,
I think social contamination becomes addictive ultimately.
sure.
And I think it can become a dependency that keeps people in that state of toxicity.
Of course. Like alcohol, sugar, drugs, anything, you could become dependent on what used to give you some peace and quiet. And instead of figuring it out for yourself, you keep using, you reach for another joint or another drink or another news flash
Yeah,
instead of reaching for your own consciousness and saying, wait a minute, reach for myself and see where it'll take me.
absolutely.
All right, I am. Is there anything you'd like to leave our viewers with? I think you've pretty much summed it up beautifully. I've enjoyed this conversation. They always go everywhere I never knew I thought they should go, and so I appreciate your perspective and what you've got to share with them. And I'm looking very much forward to getting this up and doing more.
Yeah, the one thing that I will say is that for people that didn't know this, Lorenzo didn't tell me what we were going to be talking about, so he kind of sprung it on me in the moment, just so that you understand that. And then the other part about it is that our conversations are so organic and in my experience they're transcendental in a sense that to be able to do that with somebody else without even knowing what you're going to talk about, but it goes in these directions is pretty remarkable.
Yeah,
So I appreciate that and I thank you for that.
no worries. I'm happy we're becoming friends and we're getting to share, and together we're doing becoming more than the sum of our parts, as they say. And it's allowing, something I've always thought and dreamed and hoped since I was a little boy. I think possible is to make this wonderful community with other strong beings, share it and get it out there. Because to me, that's why a man is here. Man is here to help their community become better, stronger, and to protect your immediate and then take it out from the monsters. And I think, the monsters or the contamination could be looked at as that, something that really, if you become aware of it, maybe you'll fall less victim to it.
And I am grateful and I'm appreciative of all that you do, Lorenzo, at the New Agora.
Oh yeah, my friend has told me I never share it enough. Come to newagora.ca. I put regular updates every day, at least 3 amazing articles you could probably meditate on for a year and learn something. The new now, the video that's going to go up with this, I put Iam Saums, his new articles up every time he shares them, even if I disagree with a little bit of them. I might sit in hem and haw, and then I go, wait a minute, who am I to stop someone from sharing a perspective of what they wish to share? Because maybe someone else needs to hear what I've already heard or I don't want to hear, and it has allowed me to become a better man. So thank you for helping me with that as well, Ian.
Oh, anytime, man. Appreciate
All,
it.
all right. Well, I'll see you again soon. I love you all very much. I hope to continue on, and please like, subscribe, share, and if anybody has any other future ideas for future chats that I can have with Ian, don't be shy. All intelligent contributions are welcome.
Thank you.
Can't make me lie, lie to my heart. No one tells me where I should start. Freedom first is what I say.